Hello again, I'm natekokernot and welcome to my channel, Miracle Readiness. If you've been watching my videos, you have heard me state many times that the truth is that we are all one mind. And you might be saying to yourself, that sounds like wishful thinking, or I wonder if this guy is paying any attention to the news, because it sure doesn't appear that way, what with all the divisiveness and cruelty on display every day. So I'm going to be spending some time over the next couple of weeks, at least, pointing at evidence that would suggest that appearances are deceiving and the world we see isn't an accurate representation of the world as it is. Our eyes deceive us, as do all the body's senses. I'm going to start with exploring scientific discoveries, and eventually, when I've pummeled you with enough scientific evidence, I'll talk more about A Course in Miracles and show you how the science and the spiritual are in complete agreement on this issue. I'm switching gears quite dramatically. Science is not my comfort zone. I'm much more at ease talking about spiritual ideas myself, but I do remember that even as a teenager, I had intuitions that scientific ideas and spiritual ideas were merging. Although it would be more accurate to say that science is catching up to spirituality. The only thing that's hindering their merging is the ego, which doesn't want us to understand the truth about us because it doesn't serve its agenda. I don't pretend to be anything more than an armchair scientist, but I have learned some interesting things about science in recent years that contradict our most basic intuitions that we are capable of seeing the real world with our eyes. Donald Hoffman, who wrote the book The Case Against Reality, is a professor emeritus at the University of California, Irvine. He has given many interviews since his book was published, and they are available to watch here on YouTube. And I'll attach a link to one in the More section below. He is a cognitive scientist. He's a humble scientist. And he is very good at giving equal time to the more rigorous scientific language and the plain English. One thing that he points out in many of his interviews is that science doesn't actually ever reach beyond theory. The two most revolutionary scientific advances of the last couple centuries, evolution by natural selection and quantum physics, are both still identified as theories, not as fact, and there are a myriad of different interpretations of both of these theories, both from within the scientific community as well as in society at large. Even these theories are best guesses, arrived at through great discipline and sophisticated research, but they are not conclusive. Scientists themselves disagree because scientists are human beings, and the ego has some sway in influencing their minds as well. In this series, I will talk about evolution and natural selection first. I'll talk about cognitive science a little after that, and I will talk about quantum mechanics. If I make mistakes and misrepresent something, and there are scientists watching, please point them out. I'm not claiming to have done the experiments myself in a lab or anything like that. So here we go. Let's look at the basic intuition that many of us have, that what we are seeing with our eyes is a veridical representation of what is actually there. I didn't know what the word veridical meant when I first ran across it while reading his book, so I'll define veridical perception here as, quote, accurate and truthful perception of stimuli as they exist in the external world, end quote. One unfortunate interpretation that many of us have around natural selection is that it favors those who see the veridical truth. Intuitively, it makes sense that it would. We assume that the larger and more sophisticated a species' brain gets, the more access they must have to the truth of what is there. For the early part of his career, Hoffman himself accepted this idea that natural selection must favor those organisms that see the truth with their eyes. But then he began to understand nature's algorithm, which we call natural selection, better. Evolutionary game theory, which was introduced to the world in 1973 by two biologists, John Maynard Smith and George Price, has been heralded by science as a very accurate semblance of the algorithm that is natural selection. Since evolutionary game theory was first introduced, it has become a very useful tool for scientists who want to understand whether certain traits would have an advantage according to natural selection. When Hoffman and his team presented the question, what is the chance that natural selection would favor any organism that sees the veridical truth, the answer that came back was basically 0. It was somewhere around 0.001% or something. I don't want to make this video too long, so I'll leave you hanging for the moment, unless of course you want to take the time to watch the interview that I've shared of one of Donald Hoffman's interviews. Tomorrow I'll get into the weeds as best I can of the math to demonstrate why this is the case. Thank you for watching today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.